After a decade of waiting, Bruno Mars has done it. He has come out with his fourth solo album, The Romantic, and with an LP that has been anticipated for so long and that has taken so much time to get. Everyone has an opinion on this thing. And what is clear after a few days of being out and seeing the projections, the impact, and everything else Bruno is supposed to have planned for this new era of his career is that Bruno Mars has just scared the entire music industry. And before we go any further into why this is, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hype the video, as what we are seeing is music history. As when you get an album and an era like this, and something that has taken over a decade to come. For better or for worse, this is something we are all never going to forget. As really with now what is looking like the once-a-decade release of a Bruno Mars solo album, Bruno's already had an impact with this thing that we don't see often in the music world. Because for an album that has had so much time in between the last time we heard the artist, whether it's as a group with Silk Sonic, which now that has been 5 years, or as a solo artist with 24 Karat Magic, which that has been another 5 years, so of course it's been a decade. Well, with all that time to wait, and also with all of the different eras runs that we have seen Bruno go on since then, but also the memories that have been long-lasting from his classics in the past, Bruno is really at a point where every single person in the world doesn't just know who he is and likes a song or two from him at the least, but depending on the era you listen to him from, depending on what you like and depending on what type of listener you are, Bruno is one of these artists that everyone has had a different experience with over the years. And with now the return of him at this point when his profile has never been bigger, everyone has of course had big hopes and wanted a lot out of Bruno's new 9-song installment. And from the direction of the project to even the tracklist size of it being 9 songs. Well, there are people disappointed in Bruno. There are people mad at the styles and sounds of the album. And there were people who were trying to say that Bruno has phoned in an album of lazy Latin-inspired songs or something like that. And what Bruno has made clear from the release events for this album so far to the way he is now outside promoting his art and welcoming us more into the record with music videos like we saw for Risk It All, for example, well, ultimately, is that in an industry built on very definitive principles, standards, and regulations, Verto does not care about any of that. And he does not care how you feel about the record. And he has scared the entire music business in the process. Because what The Romantic now has done and is starting to prove this time around for Bruno Mars and his career, reputation, and legacy, well, is that in every sense of the word. Peter Hernandez is an anomaly. He is like nothing else that this entire music business has seen in decades and decades. Because even when you think about the way megastars drop albums and, well, we see it in pop and in a lot of other genres now, these artists come out, they flood the market and the shelves with 10 different vinyl variants. They drop some ridiculous deluxe a half week into the record's life cycle, and then they make these weird campaigns that beg everybody to buy and stream the song as much as they possibly can to ramp up the numbers that, well, no matter how you want to frame it, they end up being overly inflated because the fans are listening to the music to get the numbers up rather than just enjoying and sitting with the music and listening to it on their own pace. And I mean, for Bruno, he does not do any of that. He just dropped the album, put it on streamings, and put the vinyl and CD out in Target, Barnes & Noble, and all the other places you can find records. And Bruno isn't doing some weird campaigns to try and ramp up the numbers. He's just letting people digest and listen to the music on their own time. And while the numbers for this record have been huge so far, don't get me wrong. Well, while the songs have been streaming well and Bruno is showing that he is a megastar, just for comparison, Bruno has pulled in lower streaming debuts than other artists who dropped albums this year, like ASAP, Rocky, and J. Cole, for example, who despite being big stars in their own rights, they are not going on a massive stadium tour. And that's all a sentiment to the fact that with Bruno Mars, he doesn't play the same game that all artists play. He knows this curated collection of songs that he has made, despite even what people get from it at their first listen and how they may not like it so far. Well, again, even with your criticism, what Bruno Mars knows, and he is banking on this, well, is that you are eventually not just going to know almost all of the songs on this album, but you're going to love him. You're going to probably come out to the tour to see him play in stadiums in already what is gearing up to be a record-setting run of shows in the later part of this year. And for Bruno Mars, Well, before we even get into the stylistic risk he took on this album and what he was really going for, I hope everybody understands that Bruno is continuing to bank on his style of not overboarding fans with flash, or a moment that music can never live up to. And he is banking on his best trait, longevity. I Just Might worked and became the hit it did off of this strategy. As again, Bruno just puts out music and lets the world receive and enjoy it. He doesn't engage in these other games. And now, after a little over a month of that song being out, Bruno is going to do this with records across this 9-song, 32-minute LP. It's starting with Risk It All right now. The #1 push is coming for that. And as the public continues to go back and revisit this album, because it's going to leave a long-lasting impression, even if you don't realize that yet, it will continue with other songs later through this year, as Bruno decides to release and support the songs with videos and continue to build on the world of this album that he is really playing the long game here with. And so, if you are still sitting with this Bruno Mars album and this absolute musical anomaly and you don't know how to process it yet, what all of this should show you at the very least if you are an artist, an executive, a fan, or anything in between, what it should definitively show to you is just how proud Bruno Mars is of this album and how much he thought through things despite people trying to say that it's generic or it's lazy or whatever other criticisms they are trying to assert with it. As well, when it comes to the Romantic album as a whole, I mean, I get from a surface-level listener perspective the criticism, but if you are a Bruno Mars fan and if you are just a music fan at any level, how could you not see this album as Bruno Mars reaching the completion of a journey that he has been on really ever since the Silk Sonic era, where Bruno has been in the DeLorean going back in time, searching for greatness and the vision for the future of his career by taking inspiration and insight from the past and even reclaiming era, styles, and voices and putting stuff that has the soul of the old school right next to some of the bubblegum stuff that we see flooded everywhere in the music world today that might as well be AI generated. That's how derivative and lame some of the stuff really is. And from doing this with Silk Sonic and bringing soul back to the mainstream and having Bootsy Collins as the centerpiece of a major commercial album in the 2020s decade, I don't think people realize how legendary that was in itself. Even the Lady Gaga song and some of the other stuff he did on that collaboration run. I mean, while Bruno knows he can make pretty much any style of music and make a hit, I think his songs with Gucci Mane and Kodak all the way to Rosé have proven that Bruno is now having his ultimate moment of taking that same ground and drill that he did with Anderson .Paak and all of that soul stuff and is putting it with more Latin influence and is really through that finding and standing on what he believes is the purpose of why he even does all of this in the first place. As really as every Bruno Mars album has a theme and vision that it's crafted and molded around, this one is no different. It is the ultimate love record, and after Leave the Door Open and the Gaga collab, opened up the door for Bruno to be the king of love, romance, and wedding season, on a level that is competing with the biggest players there, not just of this era, but of all time. This album is really Bruno Mars solidifying that he holds this title at least in terms of the modern field and era of music. And in a time where most of his peers and artists around him hop from era to era and make these gimmicky rollouts where again they are trying to sell millions of records in a week, make a big PR fuss, and then weeks later nobody is even talking about the record or listening to it. Well, as Bruno is the guy who still has songs from the early 2000s, always surging up the charts and proving that they are some of the biggest hits of the century, like Locked Out of Heaven. That record keeps blowing up time and time again. It's genuinely insane. Nobody else has anything quite like this. To try and sit here and call this album lazy, generic, or disposable when realistically, Bruno Mars, just with that intro track alone, made their wedding song for thousands, if not millions of people, not just over the next few years, but decades with something like Risk It All. Again, while a lot of your favorite artists want you to get that vinyl and get that quick dopamine boost of the moment that their album release is, Bruno Mars doesn't care about that. He's playing the long game and he's sitting there ready to be the score of your life's biggest moments and milestones. Which is why, with having one of the smallest catalogs ever for an artist who has been in the game and industry for over 15 years now, and he is arguably the most timeless catalog of any singer in that window. And even longer than that, Bruno Mars is a master curator. And we are seeing that here more than ever. And even if you don't love the album, I'm not trying to convince you that it's perfect or that you should just enjoy every single detail about it. I am just saying, do not think Bruno is not on the money with the vision of this and the long-term play of this. And just understand that he has thought through how this album will stand. Not just for its first day or its first week like most artists only ever do, but Bruno's thinking about its first year. No, its first decade. And honestly, maybe even its first century. That's really the trajectory that Bruno Mars and the way he releases music has tended to go. And I don't see that any different here because not a single person in the entire music business has ever had a run, a presence, and a skill like this guy just in terms of dropping so little, making these long-game, long-run hits. And again, while doing it without ever having the most flashy first week, sure, opening numbers, but then ultimately having more diamond records and plaques than most people's favorite artists do combined. And as this is the album that Bruno Mars is doing his first ever stadium tour for, that is very important. Again, when it comes to the vision and intuition of Bruno doing something like this, you have to understand that again, while these slower love ballads for most artists would be a nightmare to do for 50,000 people a night in these loud outdoor venues in the hottest months of the year, the difference is with Bruno, and you will see this if you go on the tour, and I think this is why sometimes his performances don't translate as well to TV and recordings like we saw at the Grammys this year. Well, ultimately, again, why Bruno Mars is really a time traveler or an anomaly in this game is ultimately because while in the modern era, a lot of artists rely on theatrics more than their actual skill. And I'm not singling or calling anybody out or even saying that this is an inherent bad thing because there are artists that maximize that conceptually really well. Still, in an era where it feels like almost certain artists are hiding their performing skills because they're so bad and they're just making sure they got a big screen, they fly up on the stage and people see that and don't even think about how lackluster their vocals are. Bruno is the antithesis of all that. He is a let me and my band set up and get on the stage with our instruments. And I'm going to sing on the highest level that anyone on this entire planet can. That is the type of guy and performer that Bruno Mars is. And he can really say that with his chest in 2026, who is competing with him in terms of being the best singer on the planet. Because when you look at this album, The Romantic, I think what it does show best is that very principle that Bruno Mars is the best singer on the planet in terms of his technical vocals at this point. Because when you really do hear these songs that strip down the theatrics and just feature Bruno and his band jamming out and singing, I mean, none of these tracks are really insane structurally, even compared to some of his older stuff. It just feels like friends playing together and hanging out. This is so obviously going to translate to the live setting so well. I think the song On My Soul is going to be the next hit song from this album and it will get pushed in its due time. And seeing Bruno just shred up a song like that live is going to be an experience like nothing else. I don't think people realize at this point where music has become so theatric a lot of the time, and again, we are more focused on the screens than the actual artist performing. How beautiful it is when you have a collective of artists in Bruno Mars and his band just playing together and singing at a really, really high level that you don't necessarily get when you pay the ticket price of the average artist in 2026. And I really do like this album for that reason, because I think for the Romantic album, and for all of the elements and ways that it may lack compared to some of Bruno's other records and work, I think when you look at it and stop comparing it and see it as one of the greatest artists, voices, and performers of our generation, mastering his craft as a vocalist and performer, as you can tell that these songs were all recorded for the most part the way they sound exactly. There is not a lot of editing, cut-ins, punch-ins, and just all of the other production and pitch-correcting effects that we see with modern music that also do make the performances so disappointing sometimes. Well, to bring this all back to the point that Bruno Mars is an anomaly in this business, and from the executives to his peers, he scares everyone in it. Well, now ultimately in this era, while a lot of people have tried to criticize Bruno for being too much in the past, is it really bad that we are getting a track like Something Serious where you can hear a well-written song performed with Bruno and his band, and you can hear the rawness in his vocal riffs or hear the drummers so crisply while the band yells, and you just hear some banter in the back that makes you feel like you were sitting outside watching some great musicians play? Because to me, that is the magic of music. And it's a moment that reminds me why I love this art form so much in the first place. And while all things do need to evolve in modern music is amazing in its own ways, To just see someone still show that they can actually have these skills and make songs as fun as I Just Might as Fly as Cha, and then make an emotional climax that captures the other side of love like nothing left. Again, we are seeing Bruno Mars dive into this pocket of love, this live and raw sound with both soul and Latin influence. And he is just maxing out on the performances you can give in something like this. If you hear a song like Nothing Left and somehow call this album mediocre, I don't know what to tell you. That is sad. And listen, don't get me wrong. While I don't think this album is perfect, and it definitely needs more time to grow and make its mark in the music world as a whole, Bruno is showcasing that his one-of-a-kind talent that is really like nothing else is still evolving and adding more branches to what he has already contributed to the music, art, and emotional world in his career. And after all the different eras and chapters we have seen so far, we are now seeing him really hit this point where he is more into just having this one-on-one with the listener, where through the power, pain, and passion of love, he is singing at a level where you can hear on a song like the outro Dance With Me, he is still finding new pockets to even express emotion through and connect and resonate with all of us on with. And again, to foil this to an industry where most artists are making the most sterile songs to try and just pacify the listeners more and have success at the easiest price. And again, it's more about putting as many variants of vinyls on the shelf in Target for the first week over inflated numbers than actually having an impact on those very people's lives years down the line. I appreciate an artist doing what they love all the more. And when you are telling me that we're going to get to hear a singer as good as Bruno do these vocal exercises along with his greatest hits in stadiums all summer, this is what it's all about. Count me in. Because seriously, Bruno Mars has the entire music industry scared right now. Because ultimately, not just does this new 9-song album, The Romantic, sound like nothing else we have on the market entirely, but it's about to perform like that too in the long run, all while in the process. Bruno isn't just going to make you love every single one of these songs. Even if you're saying the album is trash now, but he's going to make you feel very left out if you don't go to these shows. You don't see one of the most iconic artists of a generation do a show that really is only coming once in a generation. And who knows where he goes from there. But what I do know is that with a guy who loves what he does this much and who moves on his own beat and path creatively like we are seeing here, no matter what, I'm sure it's going to be great. So now with all that said, let me know what are your thoughts on Bruno Mars's new album, The Romantic. What do you think about this record as a whole? And what do you think about the direction Bruno is going in his career? Let me know all your thoughts. I really can't wait. If you love this record, if you hate it, I want to hear about it. Let me know if you're planning on going to Bruno's tour, if you're excited about that. And what do you think this record's long-lasting legacy is going to be? Listen, if you made it to this point in the video, I can't thank you enough for the support. It really means a lot to me. And be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. It really does help me out a ton. I appreciate the support. And if you want to see... Alright, even before this album dropped, Bruno already was scaring the industry despite the way people may not want to admit it. Well, you're going to want to see this one, so check out the suggested